Was it below? Okay. Oh, you bitch. for people to understand the desire for a really peaceful life. What? Mrs. Tyler said. What does your husband do for relaxation? He reads plays, Mrs. Harris said. She looked doubtfully over at James. Pre-Elizabethan, of course. Oh, of course, Mrs. Tyler said, and looked nervously at James, who was shoveling sand into a pail. People are really very unkind, Mrs. Harris said. Those people I was telling you about next door. It wasn't only the radio, you see. 3 times they deliberately left their New York Times on our doorstep. Once James nearly got it. Good Lord, Mrs. Tyler said. She stood up. Carol, she called, emphatically. Don't go away. It's nearly time for lunch, dear. Well, Mrs. Harris said, I must go and see if the movers have done anything right. Feeling as though she had been rude, Mrs. Tyler said, Where is Mr. Harris now? Oh, at his mother's, Mrs. Harris said. He always stays there when we move. Of course, Mrs. Tyler said, feeling as though she had been saying nothing else all morning. They don't turn on the radio while he's there, Mrs. Harris explained. Of course, Mrs. Tyler said. Mrs. Harris held out her hand, and Mrs. Tyler took it. I do so hope we'll be friends, Mrs. Harris said. As you said, it means such a lot to have really thoughtful neighbours, and we've been so unlucky. Of course, Mrs. Tyler said, and then came back to herself abruptly. Perhaps one evening soon we can get together for a game of bridge. She saw Mrs. Harris's face and said, No. Well, anyway, we must all get together some evening soon. They both laughed. It does sound silly, doesn't it? Mrs. Harris said. Thanks so much for all your kindness this morning. Anything we can do, Mrs. Tyler said. If you want to send James over this afternoon.
Bloody hell.
Perhaps I shall, Mrs. Harris said. If you really don't mind. Of course, Mrs. Tyler said. Carol, dear. With her arm around Carol, she walked out to the front of the house and stood watching Mrs. Harris and James go into their house. They both stopped in the doorway and waved. And Mrs. Tyler and Carol waved back. Can't I go to the movies? Carol said. Please, Mother. I'll go with you, dear, Mrs. Tyler said. Not yet thoroughly unsettled? Listen to my reading of Jackson's menacing story, The She walked out to the front of the house and stood watching Mrs. Harris and James go into their house. They both stopped in the doorway and waved. And Mrs. Tyler and Carol waved back. Can't I go to the movies? Carol said. Please, Mother. I'll go with you, dear, Mrs. Tyler said. Not yet thoroughly unsettled? Listen to my reading of Jackson's menacing story, The Renegade, by clicking here next. Mrs. Walpole closed her eyes, suddenly feeling the harsh hands pulling her down, the sharp points closing in on her throat. This is Shirley Jackson, and this line is from her menacing short story, The Renegade. It's a story that makes mid-century domestic bliss feel like a fine layer of broken skin, thinly concealing a bloody, violent, and nauseating system thrumming just beneath the surface. It's a story that comes with multiple content warnings that you can find in the description below, and it's one of the many narratives collected in The Lottery and Other Stories that showcases Jackson's disturbingly particular brand of domestic horror. Before we get stuck in, I'd like to welcome you to the second series of Tales by Candlelight. Over the next few weeks, I'll read you a series of stories by Shirley Jackson and by Candlelight, and then treat you to a little close reading that explores the sadistic, sad, and strange goings-on in Jackson's nightmarish suburbanity. This format gives you time to have a think about the stories yourself, and please let me know your analyses in the comments or join us on Discord for a more in-depth discussion. And make sure you subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the other stories and my professional analysis of Jackson's unsettling vignettes of domestic discordance. So please, sit back, relax, rock back and forward in the fetal position, or put headphones in and close your eyes, and enjoy our first unwelcome tale, The Renegade. It was 8:20 in the morning. The twins were loitering over their cereal, and Mrs. Walpole, with one eye on the clock and the other on the kitchen window, past which the school bus would come in a matter of minutes, felt the unreasonable irritation that comes with being late on a school morning, the wading through molasses feeling of trying to hurry children. You'll have to walk, she said ominously for perhaps the third time. The bus won't wait. I'm hurrying, Judy said. She regarded her full glass of milk smugly. I'm closer through than Jack. Jack pushed his glass across the table, and they measured meticulously, precisely. No, he said. How much more you have than me? It doesn't matter, Mrs. Walpole said. It doesn't matter. Jack, eat your cereal. She didn't have any more than me to start with, Jack said. Did she have any more than me, Mum? The alarm clock had not gone off at 7, as it should. Mrs. Walpole heard the sound of the shower upstairs and calculated rapidly. The coffee was slowly
beautiful movement.
boiled eggs a shade too soft. She had only had time to pour herself a glass of fruit juice and no time to drink it. Someone, Judy,
beautiful movement,
was going to be late. Judy, Mrs. Walpole said.
Still on gangster movement.
Judy's hair was not accurately braided. Jack would get off without his handkerchief. Mr. Walpole would certainly be irritable. The yellow and red bulk of the school bus filled the road outside the kitchen window, and Judy and Jack streaked for the door, cereal uneaten, books most likely forgotten. Mrs. Walpole followed them to the kitchen door, calling, Jack, your milk money! Come straight home at noon! She watched them climb into the school bus, and then went briskly to work, clearing their dishes from the table and setting a place for Mr. Walpole. She would have to have breakfast herself later, in the breathing spell that came after 9 o'clock. That meant her wash would be late getting on the line, and if it rained that afternoon, as it certainly might, nothing would be dry. Mrs. Walpole made an effort and said, Good morning, dear, as her husband came into the kitchen. He said, Morning, without glancing up, and Mrs. Walpole, her mind full of unfinished sentences that began, Don't you think
oh my god,
patiently to set his breakfast
I hate this shit.
Dish, the toast, the coffee. Mr. Walpole devoted himself to his paper, and Mrs. Walpole, who wanted desperately also to say, I don't suppose you noticed that I haven't had a chance to eat. Set the dishes down as softly as she could. Everything was going smoothly, although half an hour late, when the telephone rang. The Walpoles were on a party line, and Mrs. Walpole usually let the phone ring her number twice before concluding that it really was their number. This morning, before 9 o'clock, with Mr. Walpole not half through his breakfast, it was an unbearable intrusion, and Mrs. Walpole went reluctantly to answer it. "Hello," she said forbiddingly. "Mrs. Walpole," the voice said. And Mrs. Walpole said, "Yes." The voice, it was a woman, said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but this is," and gave an unrecognisable name. Mrs. Walpole said, "Yes," again. She could hear Mr. Walpole taking the coffee pot off the stove to pour himself a second cup. "Do you have a dog? Brown and black hound?" the voice continued. With the word dog, Mrs. Walpole, in the second before she answered yes, comprehended the innumerable aspects of owning a dog in the country. $6 for spaying, the rude barking late at night, the watchful security of the dark shape sleeping on the rug beside the double-decker beds in the twins' room, the inevitability of a dog in the house, as important as a stove or a front porch or a subscription to the local paper. More, and above any of these things, the dog herself, known among the neighbours as Lady Walpole, on an excellent par with Jack Walpole or Judy Walpole. Quiet, competent, exceedingly tolerant, and found in none of them a reason for such an early morning call from a voice which she realised now was as irritable as her own. "Yes," Mrs. Walpole said shortly. "I own a dog. Why?" "Big brown and black hound." Lady's pretty markings, her odd face. "Yes," Mrs. Walpole said, her voice a little more impatient. "Yes, that is certainly my dog. Why?" "He's been killing my chickens." The voice sounded satisfied now. Mrs. Walpole had been cornered. For several seconds, Mrs. Walpole was quiet, so that the voice said, "Hello?" "That's perfectly ridiculous," Mrs. Walpole said. "This morning," the voice said with relish, "your dog was chasing our chickens. We heard the chickens at about 8 o'clock, and my husband went out to see what was the matter and found 2 chickens dead. And he saw a big brown and black hound down with the chickens, and he took a stick and chased the dog away, and then he found 2 more dead ones. He says," the voice went on flatly, "that it's lucky he didn't think to take his shotgun out with him because you wouldn't have any more dog. Most awful mess you ever saw," the voice said. "Blood and feathers everywhere." "What makes you think it's my dog?" Mrs. Walpole said weakly. "Joe White, he's a neighbour of yours, was passing at the time and saw my husband chasing the dog. Said it was your dog." Old Man White lived in the next house but one to the Walpoles. Mrs. Walpole had always made a point of being courteous to him, inquired amiably about his health when she saw him on the porch as she passed, and regarded respectfully the pictures of his grandchildren in Albany. "I see," Mrs. Walpole said, suddenly shifting her ground. "Well, if you're absolutely sure, I just can't believe it of Lady. She's so gentle." The other voice softened in response to Mrs. Walpole's concern. "It is a shame," the other woman said. "I can't tell you how sorry I am that it happened, but—" Her voice trailed off significantly. "Of course, we'll take care of the damage," Mrs. Walpole said quickly. "No, no," the woman said, almost apologetically. "Don't even think of it." "But of course," Mrs. Walpole began, bewildered. "The dog," the voice said. "You'll have to do something about the dog." A sudden, unalterable terror took hold of Mrs. Walpole. Her morning had gone badly. She had not yet had her coffee. She was faced with an evil situation she had never known before. And now the voice, its tone, its inflection, had managed to frighten Mrs. Walpole with a word like something. "How?" Mrs. Walpole said finally. "I mean, what do you want me to do?" There was a brief silence on the other end of the wire. And then the voice said briskly, "Oh, I'm sure I don't know, Mrs. I've always heard that there's no way to stop a chicken-killing dog. As I say, there was no damage to speak of. As a matter of fact, the chickens the dog killed are plucked and in the oven now." Mrs. Walpole's throat tightened, and she closed her eyes for a minute. But the voice went inflexibly on. "We wouldn't ask you to do anything except take care of the dog. Naturally, you understand that we can't have a dog killing our chickens." Realising that she was expected to answer, Mrs. Walpole said, "Certainly." "So?" the voice said. Mrs. Walpole saw over the top of the phone that Mr. Walpole was passing her on his way to the door. He waved briefly to her, and she nodded at him. He was late. She had intended to ask him to stop at the library in the city. Now she would have to call him later. Mrs. Walpole said sharply into the phone, "First of all, of course I'll have to make sure it is my dog. And if it is my dog, I can promise you you'll have no more trouble." "It's your dog all right," the voice had assumed country flatness. If Mrs. Walpole wanted to fight, the voice implied, she had picked just the right people. "Goodbye," Mrs. Walpole said, knowing that she was making a mistake in parting from this woman angrily. Knowing that she should stay on the phone for an interminable, apologetic conversation, try to beg her dog's life back from this stupid, inflexible woman who cared so much for her stupid chickens. Mrs. Walpole put the phone down and went out into the kitchen. She poured herself a cup of coffee and made herself some toast. "I am not going to let this bother me until after I've had my coffee," Mrs. Walpole told herself firmly. She put extra butter on her toast and tried to relax, moving her back against the chair, letting her shoulders sag. Feeling like this at 9:30 in the morning, she thought, it's a feeling that belongs with 11 o'clock at night. The bright sun outside was not as cheerful as it might be. Mrs. Walpole decided suddenly to put her wash off until tomorrow. They had not lived in the country town long enough for Mrs. Walpole to feel the disgrace of washing on Tuesday as mortal. They were still city folk, and would probably always be city folk. People who owned a chicken-killing dog, people who washed on Tuesday, people who were not able to fend for themselves against the limited world of earth and food and weather that the country folk took so much for granted. In this situation, as in all such others, the disposal of rubbish, the weather stripping, the baking of angel food cake...
That was bullshit!
In the country, it is extremely difficult to get a man to do things for you.
Press
and Mr. and Mrs. Walpole had only fallen into the habit of consulting their neighbours for information, which in the city would have belonged properly to the superintendent or the janitor or the man from the gas company. When Mrs. Walpole's glance fell on Lady's water dish under the sink, and she realised that she was indescribably depressed, she got up and put on her jacket and a scarf over her head and went next door. Mrs. Nash, her next-door neighbour, was frying donuts, and she waved a fork at Mrs. Walpole at the open door and called, "Come in, can't leave the stove." Mrs. Walpole, stepping into Mrs. Nash's kitchen, was painfully aware of her own kitchen with the dirty dishes in the sink. Mrs. Nash was wearing a shockingly clean house dress, and her kitchen was freshly washed. Mrs. Nash was able to fry donuts without making any sort of a mess. The men do like fresh donuts with their lunch, Mrs. Nash remarked without any more preamble than her nod and invitation to Mrs. Walpole. I always try to get enough made ahead, but I never do. I wish I could make donuts, Mrs. Walpole said. Mrs. Nash waved the fork hospitably at the stack of still warm donuts on the table, and Mrs. Walpole helped herself to one, thinking, this will give me indigestion. Seems like they all get eaten by the time I finish making them, Mrs. Nash said. She surveyed the cooking donuts and then, satisfied that she could look away for a minute, took one herself and began to eat it, standing by the stove.
You know.
What's wrong with you? She asked. You look sort of peaked this morning. To tell you the truth, Mrs. Walpole said, it's our dog. Someone called me this morning that she's been killing chickens. Mrs. Nash nodded. Up to Harris, she said. I know. Of course she'd know by now, Mrs. Walpole thought. You know, Mrs. Nash said, turning again to the donuts, they do say there's nothing to do with a dog kills chickens. My brother had a dog once killed sheep, and I don't know what they didn't do to break that dog. But of course, nothing would do it. Once they get a taste of blood. Mrs. Nash lifted a golden donut delicately out of the frying kettle and set it down on a piece of brown paper to drain. They get so's they'd rather kill than eat, hardly. But what can I do? Mrs. Walpole asked. Isn't there anything? You can try, of course, Mrs. Nash said. Best thing to do first is tie her up. Keep her tied with a good stout chain. Then at least you won't go chasing no more chickens for a while. Save you getting her killed for you. Mrs. Walpole got up reluctantly and began to put her scarf on again. I guess I'd better get a chain down at the store, she said. You going down street? I want to do my shopping before the kids come home for lunch. Don't buy any store donuts, Mrs. Nash said. I'll run up later with a dishful for you. You get a good stout chain for that dog. Thank you, Mrs. Walpole said. The bright sunlight across Mrs. Nash's kitchen doorway, the solid table bearing plates of donuts, the pleasant smell of the frying, were all symbols, somehow, of Mrs. Nash's safety, her confidence in a way of life and a security that had no traffic with chicken killing, no city fears, an assurance and cleanliness so great that she was willing to bestow its overflow on the Walpoles,
Fucking
donuts and
hell!
overlook Mrs. Walpole's dirty kitchen. Thank you, Mrs. Walpole said again, inadequately. You tell Tom Kitteridge I'll be down for a pork roast later this morning, Mrs. Nash said. Tell him to save it for me.
Not playing with
I shall.
talking.
Mrs. Walpole hesitated in the doorway, and Mrs. Nash waved the fork at her. See you later, Mrs. Nash said. Old Man White was sitting on his front porch in the sun. When he saw Mrs. Walpole, he grinned broadly and shouted to her, Guess you're not going to have any more dog? I've got to be nice to him, Mrs. Walpole thought. He's not a traitor or a bad man by country standards. Anyone would tell on a chicken-killing dog, but he doesn't have to be so pleased about it, she thought, and tried to make her voice pleasant when she said, Good morning, Mr. White. Can I have a shot? Mr. White asked. Your man got a gun? I'm so worried about it, Mrs. Walpole said. She stood on the walk below the front porch and tried not to let her hatred show in her face as she looked up at Mr. White. It's too bad about a dog like that, Mr. White said. At least he doesn't blame me, Mrs. Walpole thought. Is there anything I can do? She said. Mr. White thought. Believe you might be able to cure a chicken killer, he said. You get a dead chicken and tie it around the dog's neck so he can't shake it loose, see? Around her neck, Mrs. Walpole asked, and Mr. White nodded, grinning toothlessly. See, when he can't shake it loose at first, he tries to play with it, and then it starts to bother him, see? And then he tries to roll it off, and it won't come, and then he tries to bite it off, and it won't come, and then, when he sees it won't come, he thinks he's never going to get rid of it, see? And he gets scared. And then you'll have him coming around with his tail between his legs and this thing hanging around his neck, and it gets worse and worse. Mrs. Walpole put one hand on the porch, railing to steady herself. What do you do then? She asked. Well, Mr. White said, the way I heard it, see, the chicken gets riper and riper, and the more the dog sees it and feels it and smells it, see, the more he gets to hate chicken, and he can't ever get rid of it, see? But the dog, Mrs. Walpole said, lady, I mean, how long do we have to leave it around her neck? Well, Mr. White said with enthusiasm, I guess you could leave it on until it gets ripe enough to fall off by itself. See, the head, I see, Mrs. Walpole said. Would it work? Can't say, Mr. White said. Never tried it myself. His voice said that he had never had a chicken-killing dog. Mrs. Walpole left him abruptly. She could not shake the feeling that if it were not for Mr. White, Lady would not have been identified as the dog killing the chickens. She wondered briefly if Mr. White had maliciously blamed Lady because they were city folk, and then thought, no man around here would bear false witness against a dog. When she entered the grocery, it was almost empty. There was a man at the hardware counter, and another man leaning against the meat counter talking to Mr. Kitteridge, the grocer. When Mr. Kitteridge saw Mrs. Walpole come in, he called across the store, Morning, Mrs. Walpole. Fine day. Lovely, Mrs. Walpole said. And the grocer said, Bad luck about the dog. I don't know what to do about it, Mrs. Walpole said, and the man talking to the grocer looked at her reflectively, and then back at the grocer. Killed 3 chickens up to Harris's this morning, the grocer said to the man, and the man nodded solemnly and said, Heard about that. Mrs. Walpole came across to the meat counter and said, Mrs. Nash said, would you say for a roast of pork? She'll be down later to get it. Going up that way, the man standing with the grocer said. Drop it off. Right, the grocer said. The man looked at Mrs. Walpole and said, Gonna have to shoot him, I guess. I hope not, Mrs. Walpole said earnestly. We're all so fond of the dog. The man and the grocer looked at one another for a minute, and then the grocer said, reasonably, Won't do to have a dog going around killing chickens, Mrs. Walpole. First thing you know, the man said, someone will put a load of buckshot into him. He won't come home no more. He and the grocer both laughed. Is there any way to cure the dog? Mrs. Walpole asked. Sure, the man said. Shoot him. Tie a dead chicken around his neck, the grocer suggested. That might do it. Heard of a man did that, the other man said. Did it help? Mrs. Walpole asked, eagerly. The man shook his head slowly and with determination. You know, the grocer said. He leaned his elbow on the meat counter. He was a great talker.
That was a bit that trip
he said
around
again,
11.
My father had a dog once. Used to eat eggs. Got into the chicken house and used to break the eggs open and lick them up. Used to eat maybe half the eggs we got. That's a bad business, the other man said. Dog eating eggs. Bad business, the grocer said in confirmation. Mrs. Walpole found herself nodding. At last, my father couldn't stand it no more. Here, half his eggs were getting eaten, the grocer said. So we took an egg once, set it on the back of the stove for 2-3 days till the egg got good and ripe, good and hot through, and that egg smelled pretty bad. Then, I was there, boy of 12, 13 years old. He called the dog one day, and the dog come running. So I held the dog, and my daddy opened the dog's mouth and put in the egg, red hot and smelling to heaven. And then he held the dog's mouth closed so the dog couldn't get rid of the egg anyway, except swallow it. The grocer laughed and shook his head reminiscently. Bet that dog never ate another egg, the man said. Never touched another egg, the grocer said firmly. You put an egg down in front of that dog, he'd run as though the devil was after him. But how did he feel about you? Mrs. Walpole asked. Did he ever come near you again? The grocer and the man both looked at her. How do you mean? The grocer said. Did he ever like you again? Well, the grocer said and thought. No, he said finally. I don't believe you could say he ever did. Not much of a dog, though. There's one thing you ought to try, the other man said suddenly to Mrs. Walpole. You really want to cure that dog. There's one thing you ought to try. What's that? Mrs. Walpole said. You want to take that dog, the man said, leaning forward and gesturing with one hand. Take him and put him in a pen with a mother hen who's got chicks to protect. Time she's through with him, he won't never chase another chicken. The grocer began to laugh, and Mrs. Walpole looked, bewildered, from the grocer to the other man, who was looking at her without a smile, his eyes wide and yellow like a cat's. What would happen? She asked uncertainly. Scratch his eyes out, the grocer said succinctly. He wouldn't ever be able to see another chicken. Mrs. Walpole realised that she felt faint. Smiling over her shoulder, in order not to seem discourteous, she moved quickly away from the meat counter and down to the other end of the store. The grocer continued talking to the man behind the meat counter, and after a minute, Mrs. Walpole went outside into the air. She decided that she would go home and lie down until nearly lunchtime and do her shopping later in the day. At home, she found that she could not lie down until the breakfast table was cleared and the dishes washed, and by the time she had done that, it was almost time to start lunch. She was standing by the pantry shelves, debating, when a dark shape crossed the sunlight in the doorway, and she realised that Lady was home. For a minute, she stood still, watching Lady. The dog came in quietly, harmlessly, as though she had spent the morning frolicking on the grass with her friends. But there were spots of blood on her legs, and she drank her water eagerly. Mrs. Walpole's first impulse was to scold her, to hold her down and beat her for the deliberate, malicious pain she had inflicted, the murderous brutality a pretty dog like Lady could keep so well hidden in their home. Then Mrs. Walpole, watching Lady go quietly and settle down in her usual spot by the stove, turned helplessly and took the first cans she found from the pantry shelves and brought them to the kitchen table. Lady sat quietly by the stove until the children came in noisily for lunch, and then she leaped up and jumped on them, welcoming them, as though they were the aliens, and she the native to the house. Judy, pulling Lady's ears, said, Hello, Mum. Do you know what Lady did? You're a bad, bad dog, she said to Lady. You're going to get shot. Mrs. Walpole felt faint again and set a dish down hastily on the table. Judy Walpole, she said. She is, Mum, Judy said. She's going to get shot. Children don't realise, Mrs. Walpole told herself. Death is never real to them. Try to be sensible, she told herself. Sit down to lunch, children, she said quietly. But Mother, Judy said. And Jack said, She is, Mum. They sat down noisily, unfolding their napkins and attacking their food without looking at it, eager to talk. You know what Mr. Shepherd said, Mum? Jack demanded, his mouth full. Listen, Judy said. We'll tell you what he said. Mr. Shepherd was a genial man who lived near the Walpoles and gave the children nickels and took the boys fishing. He said Lady's going to get shot, Jack said. But the spikes, Judy said. Tell about the spikes. Oh, the spikes, Jack said. Listen, Mummy, he says, you got to get a collar for Lady. A strong collar, Judy said. And you get big, thick nails like spikes, and you hammer them into the collar. All around, Judy said. Let me tell it, Jack. You hammer these nails all round so as they make spikes inside the collar. But it's loose, Jack said. Let me tell this part. It's loose, and you put it around Lady's neck, and Judy put her hand on her throat and made a strangling noise. Not yet, Jack said. Not yet, Dopey. First you get a long rope. A real long rope, Judy amplified. And you fasten it to the collar, and then we put the collar on Lady, Jack said. Lady was sitting next to him, and he leaned over and said, Then we put this real sharp, spiky collar round your neck, and kissed the top of her head, while Lady regarded him affectionately. And then we take her where there are chickens, Judy said, and we show her the chickens, and we turn her loose, and make her chase the chickens, Jack said. And then, when she gets right up close to the chicken, we pull on the rope, and Judy made the strangling noise again. The spikes cut her head off, Jack finished dramatically. They both began to laugh, and Lady, looking from one to the other, panted as though she were laughing too. Mrs. Walpole looked at them, at her two children with their hard hands and their sunburned faces laughing together, their dog with blood still on her legs laughing with them. She went to the kitchen doorway to look outside at the cool green hills, the motion of the apple tree in the soft afternoon breeze. Cut your head right off, Jack was saying. Everything was quiet and lovely in the sunlight, the peaceful sky, the gentle line of the hills. Mrs. Walpole closed her eyes, suddenly feeling the harsh hands pulling her down, the sharp points closing in on her throat. Has this reading made you eager to delve into more Gothic short stories? If you can't wait for more Shirley Jackson, listen to our first series of Tales by Candlelight, featuring stories by the superbly Gothic Angela Carter by clicking here next.
Allah. Ooh.
Under the cellar steps, she thought, with his head bashed in and his goddamn letter under his folded hands. And it's worth it, she thought. Oh, it's worth it. This is Shirley Jackson, and this line is from her short, gory and curious story, Got a Letter from Jimmy. It's one of the shorter tales in her collection, The Lottery and Other Stories, and it begs a lot of disturbing questions. Who is Jimmy? What is in his letter? And what has driven this woman, our protagonist, to such brutal, murderous extremes? This story comes with a content warning that you can find in the description below. It's yet another chilling tale that deals in the dark trappings of Jackson's domestic horror. Before we get stuck in, I'd like to welcome you to the second series of Tales by Candlelight, this time featuring the work of Shirley Jackson. I'll read you 3 stories and then treat you to a little close reading that explores the sadistic, sad and strange goings-on in Jackson's nightmarish suburbanity. This format gives you time to have a think about the stories yourself, and please let me know your analyses in the comments or join us on the Discord for a more in-depth discussion. And of course, make sure you subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the other stories and my professional analysis of Jackson's unsettling vignettes of domestic discordance. So, for the final time this series, please sit back, relax, tunnel into that special place inside where no one can hurt you, or close your eyes and put in those headphones and brace yourself for Jackson's Got a Letter from Jimmy. Sometimes, she thought, stacking the dishes in the kitchen, sometimes I wonder if men are quite sane, any of them. Maybe they're all just crazy, and every other woman knows it but me, and my mother never told me, and my roommate just didn't mention it, and all the other wives think I know. Got a letter from Jimmy today, he said when he was unfolding his napkin. So you got it at last, she thought. So he finally broke down and wrote you. Maybe now it'll be all right. Everything's settled and friendly again. What did he have to say? She asked casually. Dunno, he said. Didn't open it. My God, she thought, seeing it clearly, all the way through, right then. She waited. Going to send it back to him tomorrow unopened. I could have figured that one out by myself, she thought. I couldn't have kept that letter closed for 5 minutes. I would have figured out something nasty, like tearing it up and sending it back in little pieces, or getting someone to write a sharp answer for me, but I couldn't have kept it around for 5 minutes. Had lunch with Tom today, he said, as though the subject were closed. Just exactly as though the subject were closed, she thought. Just exactly as though he never expected to think about it again. Maybe he doesn't, she thought. My God. I think you ought to open Jimmy's letter, she said. Maybe it will all be just as easy as that, she thought. Maybe he'll say, all right, and go and open it. Maybe he'll go home and live with his mother for a while. Why? He said. Start easy, she thought. You'll kill yourself if you don't. Oh, I guess because I'm curious and I'll just die if I don't see what's in it, she said. Open it, he said. Just watch me make a move for it, she thought. Seriously, she said, it's so silly to hold a grudge against a letter. Against Jimmy, all right, but not to read a letter out of spite is silly. Oh, God, she thought. I said silly. I said silly twice. That finishes it. If he hears me say he's silly, I'm through. Oh, I could talk all night. Why should I read it, he said. I wouldn't be interested in anything he had to say. I would. Open it, he said. Oh, God, she thought. Oh, God, oh, God. I'll steal it out of his briefcase. I'll scramble it up with his eggs tomorrow, but I won't take a dare like that. He'd break my arm. Okay, she said. So I'm not interested. Make him think you're through. Let him get nicely settled in his chair. Let him get to the lemon pie. Get him off on some other subject. Had lunch with Tom today, he said. Stacking the dishes in the kitchen, she thought. Maybe he means it. Maybe he could kill himself first. Maybe he really wasn't curious, and even if he were, he'd drive himself into a hysterical state trying to read through the envelope locked in the bathroom. Or maybe he just got it and said, oh, from Jimmy, and threw it in his briefcase and forgot it. I'll murder him if he did, she thought. I'll bury him in the cellar. Later, when he was drinking his coffee, she said, going to show it to John? John will die too, she thought. John will edge around it just like I'm doing. Show what to John? He said. Jimmy's letter. Oh, he said. Sure. A tremendous triumph captured her. So he really wants to show it to John, she thought. So he just wants to see for himself that he's still mad. He wants John to say, really? Are you still mad at Jimmy? And he wants to be able to say, yes. Out of her great triumph, she thought, he really has been thinking about it all this time too. And she said, before she could stop herself, thought you were going to send it back unopened. He looked up. I forgot, he said. Guess I will. I had to open my mouth, she thought. He forgot. The trouble is, she thought, he really did forget. It slipped his mind completely. He never gave it a second thought. If it was a snake, it would have bit him. Under the cellar steps, she thought, with his head bashed in and his goddamn letter under his folded hands. And it's worth it, she thought. Oh, it's worth it. Want more Shirley Jackson? Watch my reading of her quietly disturbing story, of course, by clicking here next.
The fuck are you doing outside my cage? Outside your cage, sorry.
Welcome to Windy Night Stories. Tonight's story is by Shirley Jackson. It's called The Bus. Old Miss Harper was going home, although the night was wet and nasty. Miss Harper disliked traveling at any time, and she particularly disliked traveling on this dirty small bus, which was her only way of getting home. She had frequently complained to the bus company about their service because it seemed that no matter where she wanted to go, they had no respectable bus to carry her. Getting away from home was bad enough, Miss Harper was fond of pointing out to the bus company, but getting home always seemed very close to impossible. Tonight Miss Harper had no choice. If she did not go home by this particular bus, she couldn't go for another day. Annoyed, tired, depressed, she tapped irritably on the counter of the little tobacco store which served also as the bus station. Sir, she was thinking, beginning her letter of complaint, although I am an elderly lady of modest circumstances and must curtail my fondness for travel, let me point out that your bus service falls far below. Outside, the bus stirred noisily, clearly not anxious to be moving. Miss Harper thought she could already hear the weary sound of its springs sinking out of shape. I just can't make this trip again, Miss Harper thought. Even seeing Stephanie isn't worth it. They really go out of their way to make you uncomfortable. Can I get my ticket, please? She said sharply, and the old man at the other end of the counter put down his paper and gave her a look of hatred. Miss Harper ordered her ticket, deploring her own cross voice, and the old man slapped it down on the counter in front of her and said, "You got 3 minutes before the bus leaves." He'd love to tell me I missed it, Miss Harper thought, and made a point of counting her change. The rain was beating down, and Miss Harper hurried the few exposed steps to the door of the bus.
The last time I played this
The driver
game?
was slow in opening the door, and as Miss Harper
96.
climbed in, she was thinking, "Sir, I shall never travel by your company again. Your ticket salesmen are ugly, your drivers are surly, your vehicles are indescribably filthy."
Fucking hell!
There were already several people sitting in the bus, and Miss Harper wondered
96!
where they could possibly be going. Were there really this many small towns served by only this bus? Were there really other people who would endure this kind of trip to get somewhere, even home? I'm very out of sorts, Miss Harper thought, very out of sorts. It's too strenuous a visit for a woman of my age. I need to get home. She thought of a hot bath and a cup of tea in her own bed, and sighed. No one offered to help her put her suitcase on the rack, and she glanced over her shoulder at the driver sitting with his back turned and thought, he'd probably rather put me off the bus than help me, and then, perceiving her own ill nature, smiled. The bus company might write a letter of complaint about me, she told herself, and felt better. She had providentially taken a sleeping pill before leaving for the bus station, hoping to sleep through as much of the trip as possible, and at last, sitting near the back, she promised herself that it would not be unbearably long before she had a bath and a cup of tea, and tried to compose the bus company's letter of complaint. "Madam, a lady of your experience and advanced age ought surely to be aware of the problems confronting a poor but honest little company which wants only—" She was aware that the bus had started, because she was rocked and bounced in her seat, and the feeling of rattling and throbbing beneath the soles of her shoes stayed with her even while she slept at last. She lay back uneasily, her head resting on the seat back, moving back and forth with the motion of the bus, and around her other people slept, or spoke softly, or stared blankly out the windows at the passing lights in the rain. Sometime during her sleep, Miss Harper was jostled by someone moving to the seat behind her. Her head was pushed, and her hat disarranged. For a moment, bewildered by sleep, Miss Harper clutched at her hat and said vaguely, "Who?" "Go back to sleep," a young voice said, and giggled. "I'm just running away from home, that's all." Miss Harper was not awake, but she opened her eyes a little and looked up to the ceiling of the bus. "That's wrong," Miss Harper said as clearly as she could. "That's wrong. Go back." There was another giggle. "Too late," the voice said. "Go back to sleep." Miss Harper did. She slept uncomfortably and awkwardly, her mouth a little open. Sometime, perhaps an hour later, her head was jostled again, and the voice said, "I think I'm going to get off here. Bye now." "You'll be sorry," Miss Harper said, asleep. "Go back." Then, still later, the bus driver was shaking her. "Look, lady," he was saying, "I'm not an alarm clock. Wake up and get off the bus." "What?" Miss Harper stirred, opened her eyes, felt for her pocketbook. "I'm not an alarm clock," the driver said. His voice was harsh and tired. "I'm not an alarm clock. Get off the bus." "What?" said Miss Harper again. "This is as far as you go. You got a ticket to here. You've arrived. And I am not an alarm clock waking up people to tell them when it's time to get off. You got here, lady, and it's not part of my job to carry you off the bus. I'm not—" "I intend to report you," Miss Harper said, awake. She felt for her pocketbook and found it in her lap, moved her feet, straightened her hat. She was stiff and moving was difficult. "Report me, but from somewhere else. I got a bus to run. Now will you please get off so I can go on my way?" His voice was loud, and Miss Harper was sickeningly aware of faces turned toward her from along the bus, grins, amused comments. The driver turned and stamped off down the bus to his seat, saying, "She thinks I'm an alarm clock." And Miss Harper, without assistance and moving clumsily, took down her suitcase and struggled with it down the aisle. Her suitcase banged against seats, and she knew that people were staring at her. She was terribly afraid that she might stumble and fall. "I'll certainly report you," she said to the bus driver, who shrugged. "Come on, lady," he said. "It's the middle of the night and I got a bus to run." "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," Miss Harper said wildly, wanting to cry. "Lady," the driver said with elaborate patience, "please get off my bus." The door was open, and Miss Harper eased herself and her suitcase onto the steep step. "She thinks everyone's an alarm clock. Gotta see she gets off the bus," the driver said behind her, and Miss Harper stepped onto the ground. Suitcase, pocketbook, gloves, hat. She had them all. She had barely taken stock when the bus started with a jerk, almost throwing her backward, and Miss Harper, for the first time in her life, wanted to run and shake her fist at someone. I'll report him, she thought. I'll see that he loses his job. And then she realized that she was in the wrong place. Standing quite still in the rain and the darkness, Miss Harper became aware that she was not at the bus corner of her town where the bus should have left her. She was on an empty crossroads in the rain. There were no stores, no lights, no taxis, no people. There was nothing, in fact, but a wet dirt road under her feet and a signpost where the two roads came together. Don't panic, Miss Harper told herself, almost whispering. Don't panic. It's all right. It's all right. You'll see that it's all right. Don't be frightened. She took a few steps in the direction the bus had gone, but it was out of sight, and when Miss Harper called falteringly, "Come back," and "Help," there was no answer to the shocking sound of her own voice out loud except the steady drive of the rain. I sound old, she thought, but I will not panic. She turned in a circle, her suitcase in her hand, and told herself, "Don't panic. It's all right." There was no shelter in sight, but the signpost said Ricketts Landing. So that's where I am, Miss Harper thought. I've come to Ricketts Landing, and I don't like it here. She set her suitcase down next to the signpost and tried to see down the road. Perhaps there might be a house, or even some kind of barn or shed where she could get out of the rain. She was crying a little, and lost and hopeless, saying, "Please, won't someone come?" when she saw headlights far off down the road and realized that someone was really coming to help her. She ran to the middle of the road and stood waving, her gloves wet and her pocketbook draggled. "Here," she called. "Here I am. Please come and help me." Through the sound of the rain, she could hear the motor, and then the headlights caught her, and suddenly embarrassed, she put her pocketbook in front of her face while the lights were on her. The lights belonged to a small truck, and it came to an abrupt stop beside her, and the window near her was rolled down, and a man's voice said furiously, "You want to get killed? You trying to get killed or something? What are you doing in the middle of the road? Trying to get killed?" The young man turned and spoke to the driver. "It's some dame, running out on the road like that." "Please," Miss Harper said, as he seemed almost about to close the window again. "Please help me. The bus put me off here, and it wasn't my stop, and I'm lost." "Lost?" The young man laughed richly. "First time I ever heard anybody getting lost in Ricketts Landing. Most, they have a problem finding it." He laughed again, and the driver, leaning forward over the steering wheel to look curiously at Miss Harper, laughed too. Miss Harper put on a willing smile and said, "Can you take me somewhere? Perhaps a bus station?" "No bus station." The young man shook his head profoundly. "Bus comes through here every night, stops if he's got any passengers." Well, Miss Harper's voice rose in spite of herself. She was suddenly afraid of antagonizing these young men. Perhaps they might even leave her here where they found her, in the wet and dark. "Please," she said, "can I get in with you, out of the rain?" The two young men looked at each other. "Take her down to the old lady's," one of them said. "She's pretty wet to get in the truck," the other one said. "Please," Miss Harper said. "I'll be glad to pay you what I can." "We'll take you to the old lady," the driver said. "Come on, move over," he said to the other young man. "Wait, my suitcase." Miss Harper ran back to the signpost, no longer caring how she must look, stumbling about in the rain, and brought her suitcase over to the truck. "That's awful wet," the young man said. He opened the door and took the suitcase from Miss Harper. "I'll just throw it in the back," he said, and turned and tossed the suitcase into the back of the truck. Miss Harper heard the sodden thud of its landing and wondered what things would look like when she unpacked. "My bottle of cologne," she thought despairingly. "Get in," the young man said, and "My God, you're wet." Miss Harper had never climbed up into a truck before, and her skirt was tight and her gloves slippery from the rain. Without help from the young man, she put one knee on the high step and somehow hoisted herself in. "This cannot be happening to me," she thought clearly. The young man pulled away fastidiously as Miss Harper slid onto the seat next to him. "You are pretty wet," the driver said, leaning over the wheel to look around at Miss Harper. "Why were you out in the rain like that?" "The bus driver." Miss Harper began to peel off her gloves. Somehow she had to make an attempt to dry herself. "He told me it was my stop." "That would be Johnny Talbot," the driver said to the other young man. "He drives that bus." "Well, I'm going to report him," Miss Harper said. There was a little silence in the truck, and then the driver said, "Johnny's a good guy. He means all right." "He's a bad bus driver," Miss Harper said sharply. The truck did not move. "You don't want to report old Johnny," the driver said. "I most certainly—" Miss Harper began, and then stopped. "Where am I?" she thought. "What is happening to me?" "No," she said at last. "I won't report old Johnny." The driver started the truck, and they moved slowly down the road through the mud and the rain. The windshield wiper swept back and forth hypnotically. There was a narrow line of light ahead from their headlights, and Miss Harper thought, "What is happening to me?" She stirred, and the young man next to her caught his breath irritably and drew back. "She's soaking wet," he said to the driver. "I'm wet already." "We're going down to the old lady's," the driver said. "She'll know what to do." "What old lady?" Miss Harper did not dare to move, even to turn her head. "Is there any kind of bus station? Or even a taxi?" "You could," the driver said consideringly. "You could wait and catch that same bus tomorrow night when it goes through. Johnny will be driving her." "I just want to get home as soon as possible," Miss Harper said. The truck seat was dreadfully uncomfortable. She felt steamy and sticky and chilled through, and home seemed so far away that perhaps it did not exist at all. "Just down the road a mile or so," the driver said reassuringly. "I've never heard of Ricketts Landing," Miss Harper said. "I can't imagine how he came to put me off here." "Maybe somebody else was supposed to get off there, and he thought it was you by mistake." This deduction seemed to tax the young man's mind to the utmost because he said, "See, somebody else might have been supposed to get off instead of you."
That's
"Then he's still
bullshit.
on the bus," said the driver,
Complete
and they were both
bullshit.
silent, appalled. Ahead of them a light flickered, showing dimly through the rain. and the driver pointed and
My
said,
fault, but it's
"There,
bullshit."
that's where we're going." As they came closer, Miss Harper was aware of a growing dismay. The light belonged to what seemed to be a roadhouse, and Miss Harper had never been inside a roadhouse in her life. The house itself was only a dim shape looming in the darkness, and the light, over the side door, illuminated only a sign hanging crooked, which read, "Beer, Bar, and Grill." "Is there anywhere else I could go?" Miss Harper asked timidly, clutching her pocketbook. "I'm not at all sure, that I ought—" "Not many people here tonight," the driver said, turning the truck into the driveway and pulling up into the parking lot, which had once, Miss Harper was sad to see, been a garden. Rain, probably. Peering through the window in the rain, Miss Harper felt, suddenly, a warm stir of recognition, of welcome. It's the house, she thought. Why, of course. The house is lovely. It had clearly been an old mansion once, solidly and handsomely built, with the balance and style that belonged to a good house of the older time. Why, Miss Harper asked, wanting to know why such a good house should have a light tacked on the side door and a sign hanging crooked but saying Beer, Bar, and Grill. Why, asked Miss Harper, but the driver said, "This is where you wanted to go. Get her suitcase," he told the other young man. "In here?" asked Miss Harper, feeling a kind of indignation on behalf of the fine old house. "Into this saloon? Why, I used to live in a house like this," she thought. "What are they doing to our old houses?" The driver laughed. "You'll be safe," he said. Carrying her suitcase in her pocketbook, Miss Harper followed the two young men to the lighted door and passed under the crooked sign. Shameful, she thought. They haven't even bothered to take care of the place. It needs paint and tightening all around and probably a new roof. And then the driver said, come on, and pushed open the heavy door. "I used to live in a house like this," Miss Harper said, and the young men laughed. "I bet you did," one of them said, and Miss Harper stopped in the doorway, staring, and realized how strange she must have sounded. Where there had certainly once been comfortable rooms, high-ceilinged and square, with tall doors and polished floors, there was now one large, dirty room with a counter running along one side and a half-dozen battered tables. There was a jukebox in the corner and torn linoleum on the floor. "Oh, no," Miss Harper said. The room smelled unpleasant, and the rain slapped against the bare windows. Sitting around the tables and standing around the jukebox were perhaps a dozen young people, resembling the two who had brought Miss Harper here, all looking oddly alike, all talking and laughing flatly. Miss Harper leaned back against the door. For a minute she thought they were laughing about her. She was wet and disheartened, and these noisy people did not belong at all in the old house. Then the driver turned and gestured to her. "Come and meet the old lady," he said. And to the room at large, "Look, we brought company." "Please," Miss Harper said, but no one had given her more than a glance. With her suitcase in her pocketbook, she followed the two young men across to the counter. Her suitcase bumped against her legs, and she thought, "I must not fall down." Belle, the driver said, "Look at the stray cat we found." An enormous woman swung around in her seat at the end of the counter and looked at Miss Harper. Looking up and down, looking at the suitcase and Miss Harper's wet hat and wet shoes, looking at Miss Harper's pocketbook and gloves squeezed in her hand, the woman seemed hardly to remove her eyes. It was almost as though she absorbed Miss Harper without any particular effort. "Hell, you say," the woman said at last. Her voice was surprisingly soft. "Hell, you say." "She's wet," the second young man said. The two young men stood one on either side of Miss Harper, presenting her, and the enormous woman looked her up and down. "Please," Miss Harper said. Here was a woman, at least, someone who might understand and sympathize. "Please, they put me off my bus at the wrong place, and I can't seem to find my way home. Please." "Hell, you say," the woman said, and laughed, a gentle laugh. "She sure is wet," she said. "Please," Miss Harper said. "You'll take care of her?" the driver asked. He turned and smiled down at Miss Harper, obviously waiting, and remembering, Miss Harper fumbled in her pocketbook for her wallet. How much, she was wondering, not wanting to ask. It was such a short ride. But if they hadn't come, I might have gotten pneumonia and paid all those doctor bills. I've caught cold, she thought with great clarity, and chose two $5 bills from her wallet. They can't argue over $5 each, she thought, and sneezed. The two young men and the large woman were watching her with great interest, and all of them saw that after Miss Harper took out the two $5 bills, there were a single and two tens left in the wallet. The money was not wet. I suppose I should be grateful for that, Miss Harper thought, moving slowly. She handed a $5 bill to each young man and felt that they glanced at one another over her head. "Thanks," the driver said. I could have gotten away with $1 each, Miss Harper thought. "Thanks," the driver said again, and the other young man said, "Say, thanks." "Thank you," Miss Harper said formally. "I can put you up for the night," the woman said. "You can sleep here. Go tomorrow." She looked Miss Harper up and down again. "Dry off a little," she said. "Is there anywhere else?" Then, afraid that might seem ungracious, Miss Harper said, is there any way of going on tonight? I don't want to impose." "We got rooms for rent." The woman half turned back to the counter. "Cost you 10 for the night." She's leaving me bus fare home, Miss Harper thought. I suppose I should be grateful. "I'd better, I guess," she said, taking out her wallet again. Thank you." The woman accepted the bill and half turned back to the counter. "Upstairs," she said. "Take your choice. No one's around." She glanced sideways at Miss Harper. "I'll see you get a cup of coffee in the morning. I wouldn't turn a dog out without a cup of coffee." "Thank you." Miss Harper knew where the staircase would be, and she turned, and, carrying her suitcase in her pocketbook, went to what had once been the front hall, and there was the staircase, so lovely in its still proportions that she caught her breath. She turned back and saw the large woman staring at her and said, "I used to live in a house like this. Built about the same time, I guess. One of those good old houses that were made to stand forever, and where people—" "Hell, you say," the woman said, and turned back to the counter. The young people scattered about the big room were talking. In one corner a group surrounded the two who had brought Miss Harper, and now and then they laughed. Miss Harper was touched with a little sadness now, looking at them, so at home in the big ugly room which had once been so beautiful. It would be nice, she thought, to speak to these young people, or perhaps even become their friend, talk and laugh with them, Perhaps they might like to know that the spot where they came together had been a ladies' drawing room. Hesitating a little, Miss Harper wondered if she might call good night, or thank you again, or even God bless you all. Then, since no one looked at her, she started up the stairs. Halfway there was a landing with a stained glass window, and Miss Harper stopped, holding her breath. When she'd been a child, a stained glass window on the stair landing in her house had caught the sunlight and scattered it on the stairs in 100 colors. Fairyland colors, Miss Harper thought, remembering. I wonder why we don't live in these houses now. I'm lonely, Miss Harper thought, and then she thought, I must be getting out of these wet clothes. I really am catching cold. Without thinking, she turned to the top of the stairs and went to the front room on the left. That had always been her room. The door was open and she glanced in. This was clearly a bedroom for rent, and it was ugly and drab and cheap. The light turned on with a cord hanging beside the door, and Miss Harper stood in the doorway, saddened by the peeling wallpaper and the sagging floor. What have they done to the house, she thought. How can I sleep here tonight? At last she moved across the room and set her suitcase on the bed. I must get dry, she told herself. I must make the best of things. The bed was correctly placed between the two front windows, but the mattress was stiff and lumpy, and Miss Harper was frightened at the faint smell of dark couplings and a remote echo in the springs. I will not think about such things, Miss Harper thought. I will not let myself dwell on any such thing. This might be the room where I slept as a girl. The windows were almost right. 2 across the front, 2 at the side, and the door was placed correctly. How they did build these old places to a square-cut pattern, Miss Harper thought. How they did put them together. There must be 1,000 houses all over the country built exactly like this. The closet, however, was on the wrong side. Some oddness of the construction had set the closet to Miss Harper's right as she sat on the bed, when it really ought to have been on her left. When she was a girl, the big closet had been her playhouse and her hiding place, but it had been on the left. The bathroom was wrong too, but that was less important. Miss Harper thought wistfully of a hot tub before she slept, but a glance at the bathtub discouraged her. She could simply wait till she got home. She washed her hands and face, and the warm water comforted her. She was further comforted to find that her bottle of cologne had not broken in her suitcase, and that nothing inside had gotten wet. At least she could sleep in a dry nightgown, although in a cold bed. She shivered once in the cold sheets, remembering a child's bed. She lay in the darkness with her eyes open, wondering at last where she was and how she had gotten here. First the bus, and then the truck, and now she lay in the darkness and no one knew where she was or what it was to become of her. She had only her suitcase and a little money in her pocketbook. She did not know where she was. She was very tired, and she thought that perhaps the sleeping pill she had taken much earlier had still not quite worn off. Perhaps the sleeping pill had been affecting all her actions, since she had been following docilely, bemused, wherever she was taken. In the morning, she told herself sleepily, I'll show them that I can make decisions for myself. The noise downstairs, which had been a jukebox and adolescent laughter, faded softly into a distant melody. My mother is singing in the drawing room, Miss Harper thought, and the company is sitting on the stiff little chairs listening. My father is playing the piano. She could not quite distinguish the song, but it was one she had heard her mother sing many times. I could creep out onto the top of the stairs and listen, she thought, and then became aware that there was a rustling in the closet, but the closet was on the wrong side, on the right instead of the left. It's more a rattling than a rustling, Miss Harper thought, wanting to listen to her mother singing. It was as though something wooden was being shaken around. Shall I get out of bed and quiet it so I can hear the singing? Am I too warm and comfortable? Am I too sleepy? The closet was on the wrong side, but the rattling continued, just loud enough to be irritating, and at last, knowing she would never sleep until it stopped, Miss Harper swung her legs over the side of the bed and, sleepily, padded barefoot over to the closet door, reminding herself to go to the right instead of the left. What are you doing in there? She asked aloud and opened the door. There was just enough light for her to see that it was a wooden snake, head lifted, stirring and rattling itself against the other toys. Miss Harper laughed. It's my snake, she said aloud. It's my old snake, and it's come alive. In the back of the closet she could see her old toy clown, bright and cheerful, and as she watched, enchanted, the toy clown flopped languidly forward and back, coming alive. At Miss Harper's feet the snake moved blindly, clattering against a dollhouse where the tiny people inside stirred, and against a set of blocks which fell and crashed. Then Miss Harper saw the big, beautiful doll sitting on a small chair, the doll with long golden curls and wide-lashed blue eyes and a stiff organdy party dress.
During the end of the last century, there sprung up an immense number of romances and fictions, the interest of which was founded almost entirely upon apparitions and the mysteries of haunted castles or prophecies, dreams, and presentiments. Every sort of machinery of this kind was put in requisition, till, by the unskillfulness of the artists and the unsparing manner in which their resources were employed, the superstitious branch of romance writing fell gradually into disrepute. This hot take from 1818 is an oversimplification to say the least, but it does provide us with a starting point to assess why public reception of the Gothic genre, so wildly popular during the 1790s, did indeed begin to change. The author of this article is rather harsh, suggesting that the unskillfulness of the writers and their overuse of ghosts and castles did the genre in. And there may be some truth to this claim. There was a proliferation of spooky writing during this period. And generally speaking, when a genre bears such fruit, a lot of what blossoms is going to be naff, right? I mean, the more there is of a thing, the more bad versions of that thing there will be. But equally, if the rapid rise of the Gothic meant that there were lots of bad imitators out there publishing bad books, surely it must likewise mean that there were lots of good writers out there too. When trying to understand why a big cultural movement begins to change, it's so tempting to hang on to what seem like clear answers. We want to use terms like death of the Gothic because it's final, it makes sense. It would be so much easier if we could just avoid nuance and know what happens step by step. But alas, we all know deep down, things are often a lot more complex. Ah, how easy it would be to decide something like, in the wake of the French Revolution and the terror that ensued, the vogue for tense, grisly fiction that challenged domestic norms and was in itself a revolutionary form of writing was no longer appropriate. It was dangerous. England in the early 19th century was gripped by the fear of revolution, and writing that was seen as threatening to the status quo could be deemed traitorous. But the reality is that Gothic fiction was popular well into the new century. And also, it's wrong to assume that all Gothic novels are subversive, pro-revolution narratives, in the same way that it's too simple to assume something like Victorian realism in novels, or the advent of Victorian morality and family values spelled the end to writing concerned with fantasy, the supernatural, and gore. What's perhaps most important to keep in mind is that the Gothic, the love of the dark, the spooky, the sentimental, the enchanting, never really went away at all. It just changed shape, began evolving from the 1790s into something new, in works like Frankenstein and Wuthering Heights, and then later in the century, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Dracula. Melodrama, mourning rituals, and murder were popular with Victorian readers and audiences, so it's not as if our love of the terrifying and the fantastical just evaporated. But Gothic novels, exactly as they were in the 1790s, did fall out of fashion, and this includes the novels of best-selling author Anne Radcliffe. As you'll know if you've watched my other videos, link in the description, between the years 1797 and 1823, even though Radcliffe suddenly stopped publishing new material after her meteoric rise to literary stardom, she was still widely read, admired, and imitated. But what happened to her writing and reputation after her death? Did she maintain her status as a household name, or did she experience a dramatic fall from grace?
No, I'm gonna kill you.
Now, even while Radcliffe was at her peak, there were some who believed that the modern novel or romance, the kind of thing that Radcliffe wrote and inspired, was an abomination, likely to drive impressionable readers to vice, misery, and an early grave. The pernicious tendency of novels and romances cannot, I'm afraid, be doubted upon the whole. In certain situations of despair and agony, if a man or woman of sensibility were to meet with the pathetic descriptions of fictitious writing, it might have a tendency to heighten the despair and drive them on to self-slaughter. While anyone could be infected by the modern novel's poison, it was mostly young women who were at risk. The public therefore must be alert to the noxious farrago of modern novels by which the judgment of our young women is perverted and their taste for solid, instructive reading is depraved. If you look at newspaper articles written about novels and romances at the turn of the 19th century, you find this moral panic that young women were apt to forget their duties as a result of novel reading. You find references to parents concerned over their daughters' avid reading habits. And there's an argument that goes something like, if young women read novels, they get so engrossed that they stop caring about their real lives and their expectations are irreversibly skewed. It's like how in the 1980s, Dungeons & Dragons became part of the satanic panic that gripped the US, or how conservatives today blame video games for the rising gun violence instead of guns. And in the case of the novel, its popularity is a vicious cycle, in that these young women read so many of them that it makes writers write more of them, supply and demand style. Without wishing to insinuate that the minds of the fair are naturally more light and unstable than our own, he says, while insinuating that the minds of the fair are naturally more light and unstable than our own, it must be observed. They are the principal support of writings of this kind. And that it is the encouragement they afford, which has given confidence to many a young author, not a few of whom are indeed females, to thrust their literary bantlings into the world in the belief that they would amuse and inform the idle and uninitiated. Women, therefore, ought to be protected with a firm hand when it comes to the kind of material they are allowed to read. Let her studies be confined within the strictest limits of purity. Let her remember that there is an all-seeing eye which is ever fixed upon her, even in her closest retirement. Now, in a lot of these articles, the writers admit that it's not all novels that are capable of corrupting young women. But the sheer popularity of the novel surely must mean they're likely to cause mischief. And in the case of one creative correspondent, novel reading is irrevocably linked to a life of whoredom. Commonly, the poison is imperceptibly instilled into them by the gentlest means, wrapped up in the most enticing language. And the reader peruses the novel, and is yet unaware of the effects of the poison. When the mind thinks itself most pure, it is already affected by the secret corruption that hidden works within. A writer of eminence says with justice that prostitution then begins. These modern novels, insidious, corrupting forces, written en masse and perverting the minds of the young. And Anne Radcliffe, the great enchantress, the witchy prophetess with her flighty romances and thrilling escapes, is part of that corruption. And of course, hers are Gothic novels, much more likely to be filled to the brim with evil. Most of the reviews I've quoted from don't mention Radcliffe directly. They're more attacking the concept of the modern novel and/or romance rather than wailing on specific writers. But Radcliffe is a writer of modern novels and/or romances, Gothic ones at that. And while she was often cited as the exception, of a higher class than the lurid Gothic tales so widely published, the foundations on which she designed her narratives were being attacked. Did this kind of critique lead to Radcliffe's work being deemed immoral? And was her reputation to suffer as a result? I think the answer is not especially. Sure, there were those who took issue with the Gothic as a genre, and indeed some who specifically criticised Radcliffe's work, but it continued to receive a ton of praise too. However, according to critic Rick Norton, Radcliffe's reputation certainly did suffer, not because of her relation to Gothic whoredom, but because she was a woman.
A woman?
Radcliffe was an outlier in terms of her literary contributions. According to Norton, the novels written by her female colleagues were regarded as sofa companions, right? They were never destined for greatness, and were summarily dismissed by the male critical discourse. Women didn't enter the realm of the great masters, but Radcliffe did. She boldly and resolutely claimed for herself a position within the patriarchal tradition of romance and epic literature. Now, as great as this was, Norton argues that as the new century wore on, and a new generation of critics got to her, she was turned into a bogey to warn off women novelists. Pompous critics like Samuel Taylor Coleridge, a key romantic writer, led the conspiracy to stake out literature as a masculine preserve, aided aided and abetted by Wordsworth, who complained that good literature was being driven into neglect by frantic novels. Norton holds the Romantic poets to account when it comes to what he perceives as the dismantling, essentially, of Radcliffe's reputation. But if the Romantic poets discredited her work, they also clearly took huge inspiration from it in their own writing. And in a lot of cases, they didn't discredit her, they seemed to think very highly of her. Coleridge himself, while also writing pretty coldly of her novels, paid tribute to her in his pseudonymous poem An Ode in Mrs. Ratcliffe's Manor, and her influence can be read in his fragment poem Christabel. In spite of Wordsworth's pompous assessment of frantic novels, he too took inspiration from Radcliffe. Her novels contain the subversive, revolutionary message that the sublime landscape is a liberating force, even for peasants, well ahead of Wordsworth's similar proclamation in lyrical ballads. Lord Byron was repeatedly, publicly called out for plagiarising Radcliffe, and her influence is felt both directly and indirectly throughout many of his poems. Keats's poetry too, notably The Eve of St Agnes, contains Radcliffean elements, and he famously designated her as Mother Radcliffe in a letter to his brother and sister-in-law. Mary Shelley read The Mysteries of Udolpho, which seems to have provided inspiration for Frankenstein. The list goes on, and these are only a few examples of how Radcliffe positively influenced Romantic poets and writers. Rather than being used by the Romantics to tear down other women writers, Radcliffe was ultimately deemed worthy of a place in the Romantics' construction of a national canon and literary history. But is that to say that Radcliffe's gender and her prominent role in what was later coined the female Gothic didn't negatively affect her reputation? Radcliffe wrote novels that interrogated domesticity and male dominance. Female entrapment, abuse, rebelliousness, and power are key themes in her work. As Sue Chaplin argues, when a Radcliffean heroine faints, is physically incapacitated through terror or physical restraint, loses the power of speech, weeps almost hysterically, these actions or inactions become signifiers of a radical, deeply disturbing loss of agency. Radcliffe represented the experiences of women who are stripped of everything they have and suffer greatly as a result. Her heroines feel deeply, experience stasis and breakdown as a result of abuse and extreme fear. They make decisions based on feelings and logic and reason. They're not damsels in distress, but nor are they stony-faced and coldly pragmatic. They paved the way for well-rounded, fleshed-out female characters, and Radcliffe herself, as an eminent female writer, paved the way for more women to take up the pen. It's certainly conceivable that this struck fear into the heart of the male-dominated literary establishment. As Norton views it, not only was Radcliffe's reputation dismantled by pompous critics as the century wore on, but attempts were made to rescue her by turning her into an angel of the house figure, which, if you've watched my video on Victorian women, misogyny in the short story, you may remember as a sort of idealistic Victorian archetypal female, obedient, domesticated, etc. But Radcliffe was, according to one Victorian critic, and I love this quote, dipped up to the elbows in horror, meaning she was more of a sibyl or a magician than an angel. Because she had firmly placed herself in the masculine company of Shakespeare, Ariosto, Salvator Rosa, and Prospero, she could never be trivialised, as other women writers often were. And this, according to Norton, led to and was the real reason for her undoing. But was she undone? For some critics, Radcliffe's reputation did suffer after her death, and that was because, as a female writer who didn't conform to certain expectations, she couldn't be neatly or easily placed within the canon, so she was taken out of it. It might also be tempting to assume that Radcliffe's corrupting influence on young women readers might have led to her downfall. But, ultimately, it seems that she remained incredibly influential, waving her enchantress's wand over the Romantics and beyond. The list is long. Walter Scott and Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, Edgar Allan Poe, the Marquis de Sade, Wilkie Collins, Victor Hugo, even Dickens was influenced by her. She was beloved, and rightly so. It's interesting, and a bit sad to me, that she doesn't have household name status today. Unlike Dickens, Austen, the Brontes, Mary Shelley, Bram Stoker, etc., she's not especially well known outside literary academic circles. But what's really good is that a lot is happening right now and has been happening for the last several decades to bolster her reputation. One of the reasons I'm making this content is because I'm currently working as an assistant to the editors of what will be the first ever complete scholarly edition of Radcliffe's works, a series of books that will be published over the next few years. As I said before, Radcliffe is studied a lot. She makes a regular appearance on university syllabuses, and she's the focus of a lot of scholarly study today. Now, I'm very pro returning her to household name status. So, what else is to be done? Spread the word. Read her books as a priority. Share this video series with anyone who might be interested. And, most importantly, when you're sitting alone in the small hours, peering from your window as the wind rustles through the trees, catching sight of the clouds parting to reveal a full moon. Shh, what was that? The close creak of a footstep? A fleeting shadow beneath the trees? No, surely not. It can't have been. Though I could have sworn I saw something behind me. When a chill of fear, ever so slight, starts to trickle down your spine, spare a thought to Mrs. Anne Radcliffe, mother of the Gothic. Radcliffe wasn't the only writer who penned unsettling narratives about female entrapment and empowerment. To learn more about Gothic-inspired short story The Yellow Wallpaper, click here next.
Don't need to break down my berries. What? Alright. I didn't think I was that far into the room. Oh my god, that completely confused me. Fucking hell! Why my jump height so high? Why is my jump height that high? I know I'm playing on 125, but that was crazy. Last game. Oh my god! Oh my goodness! What's happening?
We touched the walls of the city streets and didn't explain. Sadly showed us our ways. I've never asked him why. Cast down and was heaven sent to the church, no intent to repent.
What?
Just to cry.
I said last game. Get back attack your hands, so continue. They came out already? Good. Rage restarted.